Hey, ik heb iets leuks voor je. Ik heb namelijk een 100% plantaardig, eiwitrijk weekmenu ontwikkeld en deze kan jij gratis ontvangen. Ga hiervoor naar mijn website www.lopkevase.nl of klik eventjes op de link in de show notes en laat daar eventjes je voornaam en je e-mailadres achter. Ga naar je mailbox om je e-mailadres te bevestigen. Let op, deze kan in de spambox belanden. En vervolgens ontvang je helemaal gratis het weekmenu in je mail. Iedere dag bevat minimaal 90 gram eiwit en de recepten zijn makkelijk te maken met ingrediënten die je gewoon kan kopen in de normale supermarkt. Dus geniet van 21 plantaardige recepten en tag me zeker even op social media als je iets hebt gemaakt. Hi, ik ben Lopke Vase en ik ben diëtist. Mijn expertise ligt in volwaardig plantaardig eten en duurzame voedselkeuzes maken. En al jaren coach ik mensen naar een leven waarin ze door meer plantaardig te eten een betere gezondheid krijgen. Met een gezond gewicht, meer energie en het belangrijkste als je het mij vraagt, meer zelfvertrouwen. Of je nou al jaren plantaardig eet, zoekende bent in de wereld van voeding en gezondheid. Of gewoon nieuwsgierig bent naar wat een voedingspatroon met meer plantaardige voeding voor jou kan doen. Welkom bij mijn podcast, waarin ik je meeneem in mijn groene gezondheidsmissie door je te informeren en inspireren over een gezonde leefstijl, je na te laten denken over duurzaamheid en je te helpen in je persoonlijke groei. Dag lieve luisteraar en leuk dat je weer luistert naar een nieuwe aflevering van deze podcast. En dit is een hele bijzondere aflevering, want deze is opgenomen op de mooiste plek ooit van alle podcasts die ik ooit heb opgenomen. Ik heb dit namelijk helemaal niet verteld tegen jullie. Niet dat ik weet in ieder geval, ik kan me niet herinneren. Maar ik ben op dit moment al eventjes in Kaapstad. En op het moment dat ik deze introductie inspreek, ga ik ook bijna weer naar huis. Dat is ook weer prima. Ik kijk ook weer uit naar Nederland. Maar eventjes om jullie een klein beetje mee te nemen in hoe dit gesprek tot stand is gekomen. Afgelopen jaar, vorig jaar bedoel ik, in het einde van het jaar, ik denk dat het november was. Toen was ik in Utrecht aanwezig op een congres van PAN. En als je consument bent, dan zal dat misschien niet meer per se gelijk een belletje doen rinkelen. Maar als je zorgprofessional bent, dan misschien wel. En als dat niet zo is, dan moet je zeker van deze organisatie weten. PAN staat voor Physician Association in Nutrition. En het is een organisatie, een vereniging van zorgprofessionals die zich inzetten voor goede voeding in de zorg, betere voeding en daar ook duurzaamheid aan koppelen. En dan kom je dus al snel uit bij een overwegend, op zijn minst plantaardig voedingspatroon. Het is een hele fijne vereniging om in te zitten. En ze hebben naast dat ze een internationale organisatie zijn, ook allerlei landelijke afdelingen. Waaronder dus PAN Nederland. En daarom was het congres ook in Utrecht, maar daar kwamen ook mensen van de hele wereld. Ik ben sinds dat congres ook lid geworden. Ik had nooit zo goed door wat PAN nou precies deed. Behalve dan dat ik wist waar ze voor stonden, maar wat ze dan concreet deden, dat was mij niet helemaal helder. Maar na die dag was het helemaal helder en ik voelde me er zo ontzettend prettig bij deze club van mensen. En wat me met name heel erg aansprak, ze doen heel veel overigens, maar wat mij heel erg aansprak is het feit dat ik leerde daar dat PAN ook probeert zichzelf te betrekken in de totstandkoming van dietary guidelines, dus voedingsrichtlijnen. En zeker afgelopen jaar, zeg ik het weer, vorig jaar. Ik moet nog even wennen aan het feit dat we in 2025 leven inmiddels. In 2024, maar ook al 2023 is er een soort golf gekomen van allerlei dietary guidelines in Europa die werden geüpdate. En eigenlijk allemaal dezelfde kant op, namelijk meer plantaardig. Dat is steeds, als je een richtlijn ziet die geüpdate wordt, nu wel de trend. Hij wordt meer plantaardig. En dat is niet zo gek, want A, meer plantaardig is gezond voor mensen. En B, meer plantaardig is duurzaam. En duurzaamheid gaat over gezondheid. En ik vind het ook heel erg mooi dat steeds meer richtlijnen dit nu ook echt meenemen in hun adviezen. Maar ja, zo'n richtlijn komt natuurlijk tot stand met allerlei wetenschappers. En wat PAN dus doet, ik hoop dat ik het goed heb begrepen. Maar wat PAN dus onder andere doet, is proberen aan tafel te komen bij de totstandkoming van die richtlijnen. Want je kan je voorstellen dat als daar iemand zit die ook daadwerkelijk heel veel weet van de wetenschap, die ze kunnen aandragen bij de totstandkoming van dergelijke richtlijnen, die vervolgens wetenschappelijke artikelen kan aandragen over de voordelen van een plantaardig dieet voor gezondheid, voor de planeet. Maar denk ook aan hele specifieke dingen. Bijvoorbeeld iemand die bekend is met wetenschappelijke artikelen over de voordelen, of op zijn minst observaties van sojadrink in het voedingspatroon ten opzichte van zuivel. En dit is denk ik iets heel belangrijks om even te begrijpen, want ik weet dat heel veel mensen een soort wantrouwen hebben tegenwoordig naar voedingsrichtlijnen. Maar bij voedingsrichtlijnen en hoe die tot stand komen, zitten echt gewoon hele degelijke voedingswetenschappers. Daar twijfel ik niet aan. Het ding is wel dat voedingswetenschappers een eigen bias hebben. Daarom is het ook altijd een grote groep van voedingswetenschappers die elkaar ook in de gaten houdt en corrigeert. Dat is alleen maar heel erg goed, want dat maakt het steeds minder biased uiteindelijk. Maar uiteindelijk ook gewoon mensen zijn. En je moet maar net bekend zijn met bepaalde wetenschap, zodat je die ook daadwerkelijk kan aandragen. Daar zit niet altijd onwil achter. Maar je kan gewoon niet overal van op de hoogte zijn. Nou, en PAN zorgt er dus onder andere voor, of doet zijn best om bepaalde mensen aan tafel te krijgen die een bepaalde input kunnen brengen bij de totstandkoming van dergelijke voedingsrichtlijnen. En dit was echt waar ik heel erg op aanging, want voedingsrichtlijnen zijn ongekend belangrijk voor wat er uiteindelijk qua landelijk beleid bijvoorbeeld wordt uitgerold. Want je kan wel willen, maar als er in een voedingsrichtlijn een bepaalde kennis nog niet is opgenomen, dan zullen heel veel mensen altijd verwijzen naar de richtlijnen die het tegenspreekt wat jij op dat moment wil doen. Bijvoorbeeld binnen een gemeente of zo, een overheidsorganisatie. Want dat is vaak waar ze naar kijken als ze gezonder beleid willen uitrollen. Is het in lijn met de schijf van 5 bijvoorbeeld. Nou, daar ging ik helemaal van aan. Ik dacht, dit is fantastisch, deze organisatie, hier wil ik meer van weten, ik word lid. En ben je zorgprofessional, word ook lid. Want hoe meer leden, hoe groter de organisatie is, hoe serieuzer het ook is, hoe meer gewicht ze in de schaal brengen. Word lid. Echt waar. Dit is geen spon, want ik betaal gewoon netjes mijn contributie. Maar goed, ik was op het congres en ik weet niet precies hoe het ging, maar oh ja, ik weet het wel weer. Ik kwam er op het congres achter dat er dus ook een PAN Zuid-Afrika was. Of een South Africa, moet ik natuurlijk zeggen. En ik dacht, hey, Zuid-Afrika, daar ga ik binnenkort heen. En ik wil daar wel graag wel eventjes kennis maken met iemand van PAN. Ik bedoel, het is altijd goed om overal je connecties te hebben. Nou, en zo ben ik daar een beetje rond gaan vragen wie daar was van de divisie Zuid-Afrika. En zo kwam ik uiteindelijk in contact met Nanine. Een hele leuke vrouw. Een echte plant-based health advocate. Ze is ook arts. Dus ze is ooit afgestudeerd als arts. Is zich vervolgens helemaal gaan inzetten voor het promoten van gezonde voedingspatronen. En nu dus actief voor PAN. En ze gaat jullie straks zelf aangeven wat ze precies doet voor PAN en hoe ze zich inzet voor de voedingsrichtlijnen. En dat is dus ook waar we het specifiek over gaan hebben. Maar we hadden in Utrecht afgesproken, als ik in Zuid-Afrika ben, dan gaan we even afspreken. Zij heeft mij vervolgens hier meegenomen naar een prachtige plek genaamd Lawrenceford. Dit ligt in Somerset West. Mocht je een beetje bekend zijn in de buurt van Kaapstad of Zuid-Afrika, dat ligt een klein beetje achter Stellenbosch. Ja, echt. Ik heb er geen woorden voor. Het zijn van die adembenemende plekken. Het is zo'n fijne ambiance die daar hangt. En het weer was goed. En leuke mensen, relaxte sfeer. En daar had je ook een flower farm. Dus een bloementuin. En daar kon je zelf je bloemen plukken. En dan werd er een mooi boeket van gemaakt. Het was heel erg leuk om te doen. Dat zijn we eerst gaan doen. Maar dat is allemaal niet relevant voor jullie. Was wel heel gezellig. En vervolgens heb ik haar eigenlijk gewoon on the spot gevraagd. Ik had het wel al een klein beetje gezegd van, goh, zou je daarvoor openstaan? En ik dacht, weet je wat, ik neem gewoon mijn podcastapparatuur mee. En dan zien we wat er van komt. Want uiteindelijk wil ik haar ook niet aan het werk zetten als ze niet aan het werk is. We hadden in principe gewoon een leuke casual meetup gepland. Maar ze zei van, nee, hartstikke leuk. Dus toen hebben we daar een picknicktafel gezocht. En zijn we gaan podcasten over dietary guidelines. En het is gewoon een heel mooi gesprek geworden waar je nu naar kan luisteren. Het is dus uiteraard in het Engels. Het had in theorie gekund in het Nederlands en Afrikaans. Maar ja, dat wordt een heel ingewikkeld gesprek waarbij jullie echt denken dat je dyslexie nu helemaal op hol is geslagen. Dus dit werkt toch beter. Maar besef wel, Engels is niet mijn eerste taal. Ik beschouw mezelf niet als super slecht in Engels. Maar ik denk dat als je terug hoort dat ik misschien af en toe iets zeg, dat je denkt, dit had iets beter gekund. Ik weet het. Ik hoop dat je me kunt vergeven. Nanine begreep mij en ik begreep haar. Dus ik denk dat we er op zich wel zijn uitgekomen. Maar mocht je dus iets horen, dan weet je hoe het komt. En ik ga jullie gewoon niet langer laten wachten. Ik ga jullie heel veel plezier wensen met het gesprek met Nanine. En nogmaals, als je op enige manier bij de zorg verbonden bent, zoek even PEN op, want het is een hele fijne organisatie om je bij aan te melden. En mocht je consument zijn, dan is dit echt een hele fijne podcast om te leren over voedingsrichtlijnen. En vooral dat we niet zo sceptisch zijn naar de voedingsrichtlijnen, want als iedereen toch eens zou eten volgens de voedingsrichtlijnen, zou dat echt ontzettend goed zijn voor onze gezondheid. En Nanine gaat vervolgens ook nog uitleggen hoe zij proberen om die richtlijnen nog plantaardiger te maken en hoe dat werkt. Ik heb daar zelf ook weer wat nieuwe dingen uitgeleerd. Nog één ding wat ik even belangrijk vind om te zeggen van tevoren. Op een gegeven moment dan hoor je mij het woord lobbyist gebruiken. En geef ik aan of vraag ik aan haar van, jullie zijn eigenlijk ook een soort lobbyorganisatie. Ik weet niet zeker of zij die vraag nou helemaal begreep. Misschien ook wel, maar maakt op zich niet uit, want het antwoord was heel verhelderend en gaf weer zeker nieuwe kennis aan mij over hoe dit werkt. Maar wat ik nog wel even belangrijk vind om te zeggen, want het klinkt misschien nu als je me zo hoort, dat is dus echt een Engels-Nederlands dingetje, want in Nederland had ik me iets beter kunnen uitdrukken, denk ik. Alsof ik PAN ook beschouw als een lobbyorganisatie. En dat is het misschien ook eigenlijk wel een beetje, maar voor mij is dat dus niet per se iets verkeerds. Ik bedoel, een lobbyist is in principe gewoon iemand die voor de goede of de foute zaak, maar probeert invloed uit te oefenen binnen een bepaald instituut. Ik heb ook ooit een podcast opgenomen met Armanda Govers, 2 zelfs. Zij werkte toen ook als een lobbyist bij de VVD, om gewoon van binnenuit die partij te vergroenen. En dat is dus ook de context waarin ik deze vraag stelde. Dus mocht daar twijfel over zijn, ik bedoelde er wel mee PAN als lobbyorganisatie, maar ik bedoelde daar niet mee van, dat is iets verkeerds of zo, helemaal niet. Want ze lobbyen voor de goede zaak. Dat wilde ik nog even verhelderen voordat de podcast start. Maar ga vooral genieten van het gesprek en ik hoop dat je er heel veel van leert. En het is jammer dat er geen video bij zit, maar ik denk dat je met een beetje de vogeltjes af en toe op de achtergrond. En op een gegeven moment dan komt er trouwens nog een tractor in zijn achteruit achter ons langs. Maar als het goed is hoor je dat niet heel erg in de podcast terug. Want ik heb goede microfoons daarvoor. Maar dan krijg je echt de full experience. Dus heel veel plezier met het gesprek met Nanine. Well, so good to have you here, and actually that you have me here. And this is definitely the prettiest place I've ever recorded a podcast. That in itself makes it very special, at least to me. And thank you for your time.
Yes.
And I think it's good if you start with a little introduction of yourself, and maybe you can take us on the roads you traveled before you became what you do right now. And I know you were in medicine. Tell us.
Sure, yeah.
How did you get interested in plant-based nutrition?
We definitely are having this conversation in a very beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
Just to set the scene, we're sitting in a garden in Lawrenceford in South Africa. So it's really amazing place to be sitting
Sunny.
here.
We just picked flowers.
The flowers are blooming. The music is going. It's really beautiful. So nice to be here.
Yes.
And yeah, my name's Nanine. I'm a medical doctor and I work with the Physicians Association for Nutrition, a global medical nonprofit. And my journey started back a very long time ago when I studied medicine here in South Africa. And I was really, really passionate about health and the human body and how to just achieve balance, because a lot of my life I struggled with chronic health issues. So I think that also led me to learn more about my health and become a doctor, because I wanted to understand what was happening in my own body. And it was while I was studying that I really struggled with my health. And I actually, outside of my studies, got some information that, maybe dairy isn't so good for your inflammation and maybe that's making you sick. And I thought to myself, why have no other doctors told me this? Why have I never studied and learned about this? So that was really the start for me, where almost like a light switch or a light bulb went on, that what we eat and what we put in our bodies has a big effect on your health. And that opened up a whole journey for me of learning about your diet, but specifically the benefits of plant-based diets for chronic health issues and for inflammation. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized that my colleagues didn't know about it. And that kind of grew that passion within me to share the information. And then hopefully to be able to help so many people in South Africa who are living with chronic disease like heart disease, diabetes, obesity. We really need to give them as many options as possible. And that was where my whole journey started, with promoting healthy plant-based diets.
And it really started with health. And did you already think or did you know about the connection between our diet and the environmental impact of our diet?
At that point, I had no idea. It was after my studies that I first started working with the nonprofit ProVeg. And that was when I learned about their 5 pros, which is pro health, the part that I was very passionate about. But they also had pro animal, pro environment, pro justice, and pro taste. So I started learning more about the environmental impacts, and I could just see so many win-wins that aligned. And so it was really important for me to integrate that into my work. And I became, just because I knew that there was a gap in that understanding, that also really became a big part of the information that I was sharing.
Yeah. And you now work for PEN?
Yes.
Can you tell a little bit more about PEN? We also have PEN in the Netherlands.
Yes.
What's PEN doing, and what do you do for PEN?
Sure. So in 2020, together with my colleagues, we founded the South African National Office of PAN. And that's when my journey with PAN started. So we are part of a global medical nonprofit, and we work with health professionals, students, and policymakers, raising awareness of plant-forward diets for chronic disease, climate change, and pandemic risk. So that very much describes the type of work that we do, the type of information, and who we work with, which is specifically just educating health professionals in that gap of information that they didn't receive in medical school. And yeah, we started in 2020. It was kind of a time where a lot of things were digital. So we started running online learning programs, and they were really popular. And we do a lot of different activities, actually.
Tell us a little bit more about why is PEN needed, because I still think a lot of people don't realize how little information healthcare professionals or doctors specifically get about nutrition.
Yeah,
it's a big part, of course, of health.
Yes, and we've heard so many statistics coming from places like America that doctors only get 1 hour of nutrition education in their studies, something like that. And we did a social media survey amongst our students in the country, and the medical students also said they were not being taught about nutrition. And we interviewed or surveyed the dietetic students, and they said, okay, they learn everything about nutrition, but they don't get taught about plant-based nutrition. So there's a big gap in information, and to change the medical curriculum takes a long time. There's a lot of background work that needs to go into changing curricula. So we bridge that gap in a very easy, accessible way. And we just decided to fill that gap ourselves. And we found that a lot of these students these days, like the younger generation, are really interested to learn about nutrition and also sustainability. So our students are really passionate about this, and they're the ones that are bringing the information into the universities now.
Really? So they are more like, should I say progressive? Or
much more? Obviously, a lot of the younger generations we know are eating more plant-based. They're more conscious of their environmental impact. You're going to have a tough time trying to educate a doctor who is, on the edge of retirement. They have studied and worked their whole career, and they say, well, this is the first time I'm learning about it. We've eaten meat our whole lives and we're fine. But you also get people that say, I smoked cigarettes my whole life and I'm fine.
Really?
Yeah, I was in Egypt once and somebody offered me a cigarette and I was like, no, thanks. He's like, why don't you smoke? Oh, it's not good for your health. And he said, no, well, my grandmother smoked until she was 90 and nothing happened. It's like, well, I don't think that's the case for everybody.
But that's cigarettes. And when it comes to nutrition, is it more like the mindset of it's actually bad, or just more like a neutral food, or maybe even health promoting? Because when it comes to meat, of course, a lot of physicians still think you need it, especially when you're fragile. Meat is the answer, or dairy, or...
Well, in public health, I see a lot of similarities in kind of the smoke-free movement that happened in the late 1900s, where a lot of people were smoking. I mean, doctors were recommending smoking. The campaign said, your doctor recommends Camels, and people were smoking in doctors' rooms and in hospitals. And there was a big public health movement when the science showed that cigarette smoking causes cancer, that they started phasing out cigarette smoke in public spaces and in healthcare. And I see a lot of parallels potentially happening with the overconsumption of meat. Now, it may be something that we have recommended in the past, but science shows that red meat is definitely causes gastrointestinal cancers, or, is associated with many different types of
especially the processed meats, right?
The processed meats and red meats, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think there is a similar shift happening that we just... I see a lot of parallels in those two movements. For example, at the Public Health Conference in South Africa, they last year... there was obviously no smoking at the conference, so that's like one milestone. Then a couple of years ago, they actually stopped serving sugar-sweetened beverages for free. So you would have to pay if you wanted like a fizzy, sugary drink.
Okay.
And we thought that's really amazing and progressive. How about next year? There's no processed meat. So we're doing some advocacy there to really make the healthy conference environments serve healthy, sustainable foods, and really set the example for health professionals to learn in those conference environments what they should be eating.
Yeah, especially in a health conference. It's funny that you said something like that, so progressive. Should have been like this like 20 years ago, but still we're getting there. And when you talk about like the challenges, because you just talked about the doctor that's almost getting retired, and I sensed a little bit like, well, just let them go, don't put your attention on them, or too much energy, I mean. At the same time, you talk about the younger doctor that's very willing. Is that the only challenge, or is it like just wait for a while and now the younger generation will start more talking about nutrition and healthy and environmental friendly diets? Or are there more challenges in making this more nutrition part of medicine more accepted?
Well, I think for us, we spend a lot of our energy on the youth and the younger generation just because of the impact that they're going to have. As soon as they graduate, they'll be, shaping healthcare and be consulting with patients. So we feel like it's the best place for us to put our energy is really in the younger generations. And we also are not trying to necessarily convince people. So we're just sharing the information, and whoever is interested is then attracted to our programs and our lectures and our social events. So if the older generation is not interested, then that's fine. We have enough students and enough of the youth who are really leading the change here.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit more about nutrition guidelines, because I know you put a lot of effort in changing guidelines, or how do you say it? More like forming them, I think, when they are updated. Let's first talk about, especially in Europe, we had like 2024 and 2025, it was like a wave of updates on the guidelines. We had Norway, we had Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, or the Nordic countries. Denmark is very progressive. Netherlands, I hope, is soon to come after that. But you also now see that shift, that environmental impact of the food is taken into account when they form those guidelines. How does it work? What do you do for that?
Yeah.
And
so apart from our work in South Africa, or my work with PAN in South Africa, I also work with the global teams on food-based dietary guidelines. And that is an extension of my wonderful colleague, Annalena Klapp, who is based in Germany and studied all the dietary guidelines in the whole world as part of her PhD. So I started working closely with her, and we looked at all the guidelines and really were able to create recommendations to move guidelines in a certain direction. And the reason why food-based dietary guidelines are so important is they are actually they're basically the government's recommendations of what is a healthy diet. They're formed on a country level because there's no such, like, you can't take one healthy diet. It's not going to be the same in every single country. I mean, there's amazing work done with the planetary health diet. But actually, if you look at places like the WHO, they very much are believers that healthy diets need to be formed in specific countries based on what a country's nutritional challenges are, based on what local foods are available.
And there are thousands ways to make a diet healthy.
Exactly.
Thousands.
And the food that you have in the Netherlands is not going to be the same spread of food that we have in South Africa. So the WHO and the FAO teamed up in about 1995, and they created a way for countries to develop their food-based dietary guidelines on a public government level. So these guidelines have been formed in over 100 countries. I think in 2021, it was 111 countries that had food-based dietary guidelines. So they're quite similar in the way that they're developed, but they are unique for each country. And the first time that I really got my attention stuck on food-based dietary guidelines is when also I was at the public health conference in South Africa, and we were kind of debating about processed meat. And a colleague of mine who's very kind of prominent in nutrition in South Africa, she said, you're not going to change anything unless you change the food-based dietary guidelines.
Yeah, because they will always say, but the guidelines.
The guidelines. Yeah. The guidelines are what medical students learn about, what dietetic students learn about. If you wake up a dietitian in South Africa in the middle of the night, they can recite the food-based dietary guideline, and it's the same in every single country. The guidelines also inform how, like, public feeding schemes are implemented. So in a school, they have to follow the food-based dietary guidelines as what they're going to serve to people. And same with hospitals, same with medical insurance companies. Yeah. They model food-based dietary guidelines as the healthy kind of recommendations. So they're extremely influential policies. And traditionally, they did not really focus on sustainability. This is quite a new thing, that sustainability is being edged into the guidelines and slowly being included in the guidelines. But you'll find the guidelines that were published maybe in the late 90s didn't say anything about sustainability.
Is that also because of lobbying? And I mean the good lobbying, I would say. Just people mentioning it. Hey, why are we not? Or does that come naturally? Why? What happened that we all of a sudden can say, hey, but how does this dietary pattern influence our environment?
Yeah, so I don't think the lobbying groups, the corporate lobbying groups, really like that we're talking about environment.
But you also have the good lobbying, of course, the lobbying.
The good lobbying has much less money than the bad lobbying does.
That's true.
So you'll find that the lobbying that is more profit driven from corporations, they have their own interests, and there's a lot more money that has been kind of available from corporations, let me put it that way. And in the past, there were a lot of relationships between scientists, medical professionals, and companies, whether it's food companies. They were there were a lot of different types of relationships that formed where doctors were sponsored by companies, or then these conflicts of interest arise. And every country actually has a different type of regulation, whether the scientists who form the guidelines are allowed to have relationships with the food industry or not, or have conflicts of interest. So a place like Australia, they do not allow the scientists to be a part of that scientific process if they have a conflict of interest with the food industry.
Wow, okay.
Yes, so
that's very good, I think.
That's something that you have to declare. You have to declare whether you have, had a financial or non-financial relationship with the food industry in the last 5 years or so. But there are other countries that don't have that same standard. So, for example, in the United States, the scientists did not have to declare their conflicts of interest. And even, I think, PCRM did quite a bit of lobbying in the US.
The Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, you mean, right?
Exactly. They did a lot of lobbying to say, hang on, this needs to be transparent. The scientists who are part of this committee need to declare their conflicts of interest. So now it's gotten to a point, I think, in the US, since I last heard, that the conflicts of interest are declared, but they're anonymized. So you don't know who is what.
Oh.
And also, you don't know how many people are attached to that one conflict of interest. That's the last I heard about it. But basically, what I'm saying is that in each country, there's a different standard for who can influence the guidelines, and whether guidelines can be influenced by food industry. And part of our recommendations is at PAN, and the policy work that we do is we advocate for just more transparency around conflicts of interest in the dietary guidelines process.
Yeah. And does that help already? Like, are people banned from the process that you know of? Or do you have examples of that? That there was a clear conflict of interest, that it was like, no, that person can't participate in.
I think, just governments have different standards. So, for example, in the Australian process, they just blatantly said, like, if you have conflicts of interest, you can't be on the committee.
Okay, cool. And let's talk a little bit more about those dietary guidelines, because we talked before we actually started recording the podcast about the fact that I feel like more people, let's talk about the Netherlands, because that's what I know the most about, of course. More people are a little bit more skeptical about the guidelines, and I see that in the vegan community and also more like the carnivore. Let's make it like the two edges of the of how people think about nutrition these days, or seem to think about nutrition. That people that are like hardcore vegan, they are like, yeah, but there's only dairy in there because they lobbied for it. And then you also have people on the carnivore side, and they're like, yeah, but it's only lobbying, and the guidelines are making us sick. I think you know this story they tell about. What kind of people are working on guidelines? What are the intentions of those people? Because I smell a lack of trust in those institutions, but I actually prefer to refer to like the guidelines, because I know they are made up by actual scientists, and of course they make compromises there, and they make it to a certain like, for example, the Netherlands, it kind of makes sense that they put dairy in there because it's food we used to eat, and I hope in the updated guideline they will at least decrease the amount of dairy we should eat because of environmental aspects. But should we trust those people? That's my question, I think.
I actually do have an interesting example from South Africa and our dietary guideline. So the last dietary guideline in South Africa was published in 2012, and they have a separate chapter just about dairy products. And that chapter was written by people that are part of Milk SA. So basically attached to the milk industry.
Milk South Africa.
Yes. So it's a very kind of biased chapter, I have to say, because they position dairy as, the be all and end all of your nutritional requirements. they will say like you cannot meet your calcium requirements without dairy. And also that guideline very problematically says if you are lactose intolerant, consume more dairy because then you might develop a tolerance.
Oh no.
And that chapter that was written, it almost contradicts other scientific information in the other chapters that present, milk alternatives like soya milk or present plant-based sources of calcium. So it's a very problematic chapter, and we have some, recommendations for the next food-based dietary guideline. That's hopefully the revision in South Africa. So that's also an interesting example. And then when it comes to kind of milk in particular, the evidence around plant-based milk or milk alternatives is still fairly new because the market is expanding quite rapidly in development. Soy milk has been around for a very long time, kind of the alternative for people who are lactose intolerant, for example. That's been around for a while, but these almond milks, oat milk, coconut milk, these exotic milks, they haven't been around for very long. And as a result, there isn't a lot of scientific studies. And forming a food-based dietary guideline is a very rigorous process. The type of evidence that they will include for consideration for developing these guidelines has to be, systematic reviews, which means that you need to have a number of studies that are then looked at together and then form a conclusion. So you're not going to get information in that guideline if it's only one study or if it's a study that's not of like the highest quality. So scientific rigor is extremely important in the food-based dietary guidelines, and it might also be a reason why emerging concepts are not expanded on in guidelines, such as alternatives, for example.
Yeah.
Our recommendations from in our advocacy is that we do want to see more information on healthy alternatives so that consumers can be able, not only consumers, but health professionals can be empowered to look at a product and decide, is this healthy or is it not healthy?
Yeah.
They need to be given the information. What should they be looking at? How should they evaluate whether this product should be formed part of a healthy diet or not? So we really do advocate for that information to be a part of guidelines.
And it's funny to me because what you actually say is the scientists that are working on those guidelines are very professional by saying we don't have enough evidence because there's just a lack of studies done. So we can't use the information that's there. It's too little. At the same time, I immediately think when I think about like muck meats or plant-based dairy, probably a lot of the studies will be funded by the industry. That makes people skeptical. But
Yes.
the dairy industry is also an industry, of course, but people probably wouldn't see that more often as an industrial funded study.
Yeah.
Right?
And like there's no going about it. The dairy industry has, for example, been around for a much longer time. They have much stronger lobby, much more money in those like traditional animal-based spaces than the plant-based movement.
Yeah.
It is completely skewed with the amount of power that's behind it in terms of time and funding. And those are two things that influence how much science really is available.
Yeah.
How much time do we have and how much funding do we have to pursue this? And if it's skewed towards animal-based products, then there just will be more information available on that.
Yeah. Very interesting. And let's say a healthcare professional listens to this podcast. I'm sure there will. I also noticed that a lot of people are a little bit afraid to speak up about things. But maybe because you did so much work for influencing guidelines, what can you learn them on if they want to just do things in their own little healthcare space, but it's just as important, of course.
Well, a study came out, I think, was at the end of last year, that showed that the greatest influence in dietary shifts actually comes from the recommendations from health professionals.
Wow.
So I think it's really...
Listen close. Yes. Careful.
Yes. There was a behavioral science study that showed that doctors' recommendations were the most powerful tool to shift diets. So really, I think for health professionals to own how much power they have and how much influence they have and speak up when it comes to your patients, when it comes to your institutions, when it comes to your guidelines. If somebody gives you an opportunity to give input and make sure that all of your input is highly evidence-based. So go and search for the best studies. I mean, we were all taught how to identify high-quality science, and make sure all of your information that you share is backed up by science and has a long reference list, because nobody's going to argue with you when you use science to make your points. So write that letter, add those references, and really acknowledge how much influence you can have and really own that. I think it's quite important.
Yeah. And don't be afraid, I think.
Yeah.
That's something that I once heard in an interview when I was kind of starting my career, as they call it. And it was a politician in Netherlands. And she said in that interview, never be afraid. And I always listen to that when I'm a little bit, because when I doubt, should I say something right now? And then I always think about that sentence, and I never regret it when I spoke up about something, because you maybe sometimes in the moment you get some backlash, but always afterward people come to you, I'm so happy you said that at that point. And
exactly.
Yeah. And when one person speaks up, another person, it's infectious, they also feel more free to speak about it.
And it's the same in dietary guidelines, actually. As soon as a country takes a progressive stance, other countries are influenced by that country. So that's why we saw that domino effect in regions, in like European regions last year, with the Danish guideline, the Norwegian guideline, the Nordic nutrition recommendations, then also the German-speaking countries, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, all coming out with, and they are inspired by one another. So they look towards one another, and they see, oh, this one came out with one of the biggest trends in dietary guidelines at the moment is these upper limits on animal product consumption.
Yeah.
So
eat no more than.
Yeah, some guidelines would have said, eat no. Your upper limit should be 500 grams, and then you get other countries that are more conservative progressive saying, no more than 350 grams. So it really is one of the strengths, I think, especially in our context of South Africa and Africa. Is this okay?
Yeah, that's no problem. We're just outside and there's a John Deere parking. But that's just adding to the ambience. And I don't think actually they will hear it because I have very good microphones. But just keep on talking.
Okay. So in Africa, there are a lot of people that have nutritional deficiencies and that don't have access to food. So to tell somebody in Africa to stop eating meat for the environment it's not going to resonate with everybody.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more acceptable to talk about upper limits.
Probably also because here you more have the malnutrition.
Exactly.
And I think in the Netherlands we have that, but it's more like a patient that comes in that's malnutrition, but obesity and the welfare diseases. Those are the main problems. Heart disease.
Yeah, the lifestyle-related.
Lifestyle, thank you. Lifestyle-related diseases.
Yeah.
That's the main problem. So that's our main topic.
We also have a huge rise in lifestyle-related diseases because as urbanization happens in Africa, when we go from like states of malnutrition to people getting more income and urbanizing and getting more jobs, then they rapidly transfer to the Western style diet. Then, I have more money. I want to eat more animal products because steak is a symbol of wealth. So as soon as I get money, I'm going to buy animal products. And so, it's a very interesting context being in Africa. But to tell people in Africa to not eat meat is always challenging. And that's why I think these upper limits in policies are really important to avoid overconsumption, you know, so that you're not offending people who already don't have access to animal products, who don't have nutrition security, who that small piece of fish might be the only protein that they have seen come into their house in the last week. To place those upper limits is what we need to do.
Yeah. Interesting. I also want to come back on the whole domino effect you talked about. I also think that what helps in specifically Europe, that we're, of course, the European Union. And even though in nutrition guidelines, it's not that we collaborate, but I think people feel it's kind of weird if one country would be like, that's why I'm very hopeful for the next update of the Netherlands and the guidelines. It would be very weird if they all of a sudden would be like, no, more dairy.
No, they won't go against. They won't go against what their peers are doing. Of course, there will always be more conservative countries like Italy and France. I mean, they're really conservative in terms of protecting their right to eat animal products, and because of cultural reasons. But yes, definitely in the European Union, there is more looking at what your country, your neighbors are doing. And that's very much happening at the moment with the plant-based action plan in Europe and the European countries. So Denmark was the first government to publish a plant-based action plan, which is the government's plan to how are they going to really support the plant-based food movement for sustainability and health reasons from a public level. First country in the whole world to do that. And now I know that Denmark would love to see other countries in the European Union adopting their own plant-based action plan. What does that look like in their government, in their budgets, and maybe even a EU-wide plant-based action plan? Who knows?
Yes, I'm here for it.
Who knows?
We just talked about Denmark a lot, and I will add to the show notes for the people the podcast with the Danish guy. What was his name again?
Runa,
because he was at Studio Plantaardig, and they did a very good episode about what they did in Denmark, and people can listen to it because it's so progressive, and especially healthcare professionals take notes.
To learn from the Danish Vegetarian Society. They've done a lot of incredible work that can be benchmarked for other countries.
Exactly. Go Denmark.
Go Denmark. You're leading the way for us.
Last question for you. Looking ahead, what do you hope to have achieved in your work with PEN? I don't know how long you want to work there, but maybe in next 5 or 10 years?
I think in PAN, we really want to expand the amount of health professionals that we have within our community. So one of the goals maybe in South Africa is to maybe one day transform into a regional office that can also reach health professionals in Namibia, in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, and our neighboring countries. We really want to expand and reach more health professionals, specifically to in Africa is so incredible because traditional African diets are really plant forward, and they include,
you should be the benchmark.
They include a lot of indigenous foods and
beans, probably.
Absolutely, these African leafy greens. Our indigenous foods are scientifically shown to have a higher nutritional value than the conventional one that you'll be importing from somewhere. So I really would love to see more emphasis on maintaining traditional diets in Africa. I was at the Climate and Health Africa conference in Zimbabwe a couple months ago, and at least 75% of their conference's food was plant-based. And I don't think that they did that on purpose. It just is the food that is available that people like to eat, the beans, the greens, all of those types of things. So that was really exciting to see, and that's something I would I would like to continue to see in the context of Africa and South Africa.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Nanine. And I will never forget this episode in between the mountains. And now we're going to pick up our flowers that we picked.
Yes, I'm so excited. Thanks so much for having me. And definitely if people are interested to support PAN, Physicians Association for Nutrition, we do have our office in the Netherlands, but also in 9 different countries. And some of the incredible things that we do is we offer funding for medical students to host plant-based food at their events. I think one of the biggest barriers is then the type of food that people serve at their events. So if you want plant-based food on your university campus, then definitely get hold of us. We have some incredible programs, loads of ways to get involved. If you're passionate about plant-based diets, we're definitely the group to go to.
Well, thank you. I will put everything in the show notes for people. I'm also a member of PAN in the Netherlands,
Amazing.
so I can recommend that. And I will put your LinkedIn there. I think that's the best
Amazing.
people to reach out to you.
Thank you so much.
En als je dit hoort, is het einde van de aflevering. En wil ik je weer heel erg bedanken voor het luisteren. En ik hoop echt dat je iets hebt geleerd over PAN in de eerste plaats. Maar ook over het belang van de juiste mensen aan tafel krijgen bij het tot stand komen van voedingsrichtlijnen. En omdat PAN daar dus zo zijn best voor doet, vind ik het echt een organisatie die meer aandacht, maar vooral meer leden verdient. Tot slot wil ik je er nog even aan herinneren. Als je mijn vorige podcast hebt geluisterd, dan weet je het inmiddels al, dat mijn boek inmiddels in de pre-order is gegaan. Ik zet de link voor de pre-order in de show notes. Pre-order mijn boek alsjeblieft. Want pre-orders zijn ontzettend belangrijk voor auteurs, wat ik inmiddels ook ben, mezelf mag noemen. En natuurlijk, mocht je nog een klein beetje willen helpen met het groter maken van deze podcastshow, deel de aflevering met iemand waarvan je denkt dat die relevant voor is. Misschien een zorgprofessional die je kent in je omgeving, of iemand die een beetje sceptisch is naar voedingsrichtlijnen. Of iemand waarvan je gewoon denkt van, hé, die kan iets uit deze aflevering wel gebruiken. Je weet nooit hoe je iemands leven kan beïnvloeden met zoiets kleins. En natuurlijk om de show te helpen groeien. Geef alsjeblieft ook een positieve review op Apple Podcasts of bij Spotify. Kan je ook leuke reacties plaatsen. Ik lees altijd alles. Ik kan niet overal op reageren, maar ik lees alles. Geef lekker overal sterretjes waar dat kan. En ik zie je heel graag weer terug bij de volgende aflevering. Bye bye!